Welcome to Thinking Green. I'm Ronna, and we were supposed to have a couple of municipal candidates in New London on the show tonight, but it being October 7th, we decided instead to do a show about October 7th. So I'm joined tonight by Justin Paglino, and Justin is a co-chair of Green Party of Connecticut, among other things. And he was on the show, I think, like 2 years minus 1 month ago, within about a month or so of October 7th, so we could talk about the kinds of things that were happening. And he's back again today. So Justin,
hello.
Yeah, and I want to say for the technical people, we're not seeing the screen, so I hope everything is going okay. Justin, I guess I wanted to ask you to start with, you are by training a physician, and one of the first groups to really figure out that there was something wrong going on, I thought, was healthcare workers in the US. And I think I've had at least 4 or 5 different people who were healthcare workers who would spend time volunteering in Gaza, or who just, saw that healthcare workers were being targeted there. So is that what got you involved from the start, or did it happen before that and for other reasons?
Well, I mean, having, humanitarian sentiment isn't unique to physicians at all, but, I think physicians do have, we are kind of trained to treat all comers, to think of everyone the same, and to care about human life. I think of like Médecins Sans Frontières, like Doctors
Right.
Without Borders. It doesn't matter where you live, what your situation is, you're a human being, and you have certain rights, which should include a right to medical care, which is kind of a whole separate issue about.
Yeah, in this country, it's actually a problem.
Yes, which is a problem in this country, that people don't have access to medical care. But to see deliberate violence, and of course we're taught do no harm, right, is the Hippocratic Oath. And so I think war, especially something that's just a horrific and unjust war, or I would call this a genocide. The UN has called this a genocide. Separate commissions on the UN have called this a genocide. Genocide scholars have called this a genocide, what's going on in Gaza, many human rights groups. It's just naturally abhorrent to anyone who has concern for innocent human life. Tens of thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands lives lost, about half of them women and children, dying in the most horrific ways, either violence or from lack of food or from lack of medicine. All the hospitals have been attacked. It seems that doctors even are being targeted. And So there's a couple of good organizations. Healthcare Workers for Palestine has an active chapter in Connecticut, and Doctors Against Genocide are two groups that I recommend people look into. And there's probably more, but and you don't necessarily have to be a physician to get involved.
And both groups do like vigils on a very regular basis. They demonstrate at hospitals, both at Yale, I think, and up in Farmington.
Yes, Healthcare Workers for Palestine. Phil Brewer is organizing weekly vigils every Tuesday between 12 noon and 1 p.m. in front of Yale New Haven Hospital. And I've been going to these regularly since, since the election ended, and, since the spring, and it got warm and everything. I don't know how long they've been going on exactly, but they're very regular now, and I go every week, and I hold a sign that says boycott, divest, and sanction Israel, because that's what we need to do, is to put the pressure on Israel. Israel's isolated itself in the world, but the United States has given some, $29 billion or something just over the last 2 years to Israel, and we have many investments in Israel, like universities and states and their pension funds and things. There's a lot of monetary leverage that we could potentially use against Israel, which is what we should be doing. But I go to these vigils and hold up the sign, and I put it on Instagram, and I try to get, to get it a little more visibility. But I also am reminded every time I go of the Vietnam vigil, the Seoul vigil man who was legendarily would go and do a one-man vigil.
Oh, in New London?
No, outside the White House.
Oh, outside the White. We had a New London guy too, Cal Robertson, who vigiled at our Soldiers and Sailors Monument for years. He is still alive. He's living in a nursing home, and his health is not great, but he was a Vietnam vet who actually in New London reinforced that area near that monument in New London is a free speech area.
Yeah. I think that it's very important for people to speak out, and sometimes that takes risking potential conflict with some of the people you may know. But if you feel strongly about this issue, as I think we all should, I think it's important to speak out. It's been going on for 2 years. It's unbelievable the time that has passed. And for me, it feels good to know that when I go there every week, I feel that I'm registering my discontent, my opposition, and it's being seen. And we're up against a lot of powerful forces. That there've been a lot of efforts to try and stop this genocide for the past 2 years, and it hasn't stopped. But there do seem to be some signs that the tide is turning. I think a lot of prominent people are coming around finally. I think Jeff Merkley, I think, just introduced a bill in the House to recognize Palestine as a state. This is something that's been going on in a lot of countries recently. There's been a rash of countries passing legislation to recognize a Palestinian state. It's a small step in the right direction, but these, unfortunately, social changes can be much too slow.
Yeah, and those demonstrations, I think, are also a way for us to make connections with people we might not have met before.
Yeah.
So I'm not a healthcare professional by any means, but my own connection was that 50 years before, on October 6th, there was a war in Israel, and and in the day, let's see, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, after the war started, I went into labor with my second child, who was born on October 10th in 1973, and you know, we lived near the Lebanese border. When I was driven down to the hospital in Nahariya, the closest small city to where we lived, we had to call and have an army escort to make sure no snipers got us while we were driving down our hill. But that was a war. And I was in the hospital. I gave birth in a funny room, a classroom, because they were saving beds for wounded soldiers. But I had no fear that the hospital would be attacked, that I would be attacked, or my doctors, or my newborn. So on October 8th, when it seemed like the first retaliation after the October 7th attack was a neonatal ward, I thought, wait, this is something different. I've been through a war, and it didn't feel like this.
Yes. There was the feeling very early on that this was going to be an all-out kind of, you know, what they used to call mowing the lawn, when there would be maybe some violence from Hamas, or you know, the response, you know, the idea is to respond disproportionately and to respond with collective punishment. And it was clear to me very early on that, you know, this was going to be indiscriminate violence and carnage. They use AI in, you know, they wanted it. You know, they were looking to get 1,000 targets within a certain period of time, and Netanyahu said, no, let's make it 5,000, and they really wanted to go all out. I can't believe how long this has been going on, and you know, you listen to Democracy Now!, which I recommend is a place to get your news. Listen to the Democracy Now! Headlines every day. It's not uplifting, but they'll tell you how many Palestinians were killed today, and you know, Amy Goodman will tell us, you know, 70 Palestinians were killed, or 60 Palestinians were killed today, and it just goes on and on and on and on. And it's not just the bombs, but it's the starvation, which is another form of collective punishment, that they're cutting off food, that they targeted the relief agency, the World Central Kitchen.
And I worry about water. You know, we live in New England, and although it's been a dry summer, it does rain sometimes. But in that part of the world, really from like mid-May to maybe October 1st, you can't collect water from the sky. So in some ways, I have to admit that I thought there would be more death than there has been, because just due to lack of clean water.
Well, it remains to be seen, I think, what the final death count is. I think what we hear as the official numbers, which are now in the 60,000 range,
Are very low.
Are going to be an undercount, and a lot of indirect deaths from disease as a result of lack of medicine, lack of hospitals, hospital supplies. Gaza leads the world in terms of child amputees per capita. I mean, there's every statistic that you look at just screams that this is a humanitarian absolute catastrophe.
Yeah, it's horrifying. So we have a couple of slides from before October 7th, because that is considered a milestone date. I get it, but there were reasons. It wasn't out of the blue. So I wanted to give a little bit of reality of what was going on before that. Israel in the West Bank has been operating an apartheid state. I don't know when it really, maybe it started in the mid-1970s. It was not really the case when I lived there. This whole West Bank area had, no separation at all between one side of the green line and the other side. But there is a segregated road system there, and if you have the wrong color license plate, there are some places you won't be able to go, and even the places you can go, you're going to see checkpoints.
Yeah, and for anyone who doesn't know, the West Bank was taken over in the 1967 war,
Right.
and occupied by Israel. And under international law, if you occupy the territory of another people, you aren't supposed to just stay there indefinitely, which is what Israel has done.
Right.
You're supposed to either annex it and make it part of your country, or give it back. And Israel has chosen to do neither one. Instead, they gradually built up this settler population inside the West Bank, and that has now become that lives segregated from Palestinians, still about 2 million Palestinians, I think 2 or 3 million Palestinians living in the West Bank. But the settler population is over 500,000, and they are living in an apartheid situation, because if you're a settler and you live, then you have full Israeli citizenship.
Right.
Even though you're living in this occupied West Bank territory that's not technically part of Israel, although Israel considers everything its own.
Yeah. That's one of the things that changed after we left. We left in 1974, and there were settlements, but they were small, and there was not a sense that people would be able to stay forever.
Mm-hmm.
But there's been a tremendous land grab. So the next slide I have is just a picture of a settlement, and we really shouldn't call them settlements. You think of settlements as being like a camp. These are cities, and this is not the biggest one, Beitar Elite. It's, I believe it's between Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, but on the what had been Palestinian territory. There's another one, but I didn't have as good a picture of it, called, oh no, this one might be the one down near Bethlehem, and Modi'in has a population of more like 90,000. It's the size of Danbury, Connecticut. Or, this settlement is the same size as Middletown or Hamden or some of Connecticut's medium-sized cities, and you can see that it's just fenced off. You can see a little bit in the background of the hills that look like what the West Bank used to look like.
Mm-hmm.
But there's been a tremendous amount of confiscation of land in the West Bank.
Yes, and that's accelerated since in the last 2 years. But it's been going on and on and on.
It has.
Since 1967. And I get your meaning that you might hesitate to call them settlements because you get the image of a little like pop-up, spring-up town around the railroad tracks or something. But the reason I use the term is because what is going on is settler colonialism.
True.
Just like the Americans did to the native population.
True.
And now we have Danbury, Connecticut, where there used to be,
Right.
the Wampanoag Indians or whichever tribe was in that area. So the analogy is very strong. They captured this land in war. there was a native population that they did not want to incorporate into their society.
And they barely even recognized their existence. In both cases, you know, there was a mythology, oh, we came to an empty place.
Yeah, it was not empty by any stretch of the imagination, and that's kind of the central kind of problem of Israel, is that they didn't want these people to be there. They never wanted Palestinians to exist. A land without a people for a people without a land, but it was never true. And this is the root of the problem from the get-go. That there was no consideration for what would happen to these people. There's no consideration for whether they deserved any human rights, whether they deserved government representation. There was just violent removal of the people from the land that they wanted to use to create the state of Israel, especially in 1947.
And the irony of it, I can relate more than just kind of, I think, of the trauma the European Jews had after the Holocaust in World War II. But the irony is, I can't think of like any place in the world today that's more dangerous for a Jewish person to live than Israel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if the idea of Israel was to create a safe place, I don't think that is true.
It didn't work.
It didn't work. If that was the intention, and look, Israel has made the whole world less safe. People's, you know, there's this lie that Arabs or Muslims, they just have this innate bigotry against Jewish people or something like that. Now, there is innate bigotry against Jewish people as a phenomenon. There's bigotry against Jewish people that's largely a Christian phenomenon, right?
Yes, certainly, you know, European. That's another ironic thing, that the Palestinians who lived in the area were the ones demonized, but they weren't the ones that engineered the Holocaust. It was, you know, Aryans in Europe.
Yeah. And it wasn't until the formation of Israel through violence, through expelling 700,000 people, from massacring people in Deir Yassin, am I saying that correctly? And you know, through massacres and violent expulsion of people from their homes in 1948, that's when a lot of Palestinians and Muslims began to dislike Israel, for sure. Those inclined towards bigotry might generalize that to all Jews, but that's just another form of bigotry that I wouldn't, you know, when I see bigotry, I'm not going to call it anything other than bigotry. We have to, you know, be very, very clear. This is a problem of state violence, you know, that's being committed by a specific state, and it so happens that this is a religious state, although that's part of why there's this problem in the first place, is that they wanted it to be a religious state that excluded people of different religions. They didn't want to have a state with freedom of religion that would, you know, Palestine was one territory, the British Mandate of Palestine after World War I, and there were Jews and there were Christians and there were Muslims, and they were all living in relative peace together. Before that, they were part of the Turkish Empire, but there was not, you know, there was not this animosity and this ongoing, decades-long, 75+ years of violence going back and forth that seems intractable. To me, the only way to achieve peace is to go back and fix the original problem, which was this idea that we're going to create a state that's only for one religion, with some exceptions there, but they want to have a dominance, to give up on that idea, because it was a bad idea, and you completely, and you achieved it through violence, and you dispossessed millions of people from their human rights. So those human rights have to be restored. To me, and the Green Party position generally is that it should be, again, one state where everyone, regardless of their race, religion, what have you, is an equal citizen. And it seems like a pipe dream. It seems like maybe it could never happen.
South Africa did it.
But South Africa did it.
I mean, to me, I cringe a little when people talk about two states, because I think, well, the only way it would have a chance of being fair at all is to go back to the 1948 line, which isn't itself totally fair, but it was recognized for a couple of decades as the line. And as you mentioned, 500,000 people, Jewish people living in these settlements. It's like, how are Israel going to get them all on their side of the line? So I feel as though right now, if you say two states, Israel would be allowed to keep everything they grabbed. And it isn't just where people lived. When the separation wall, and I guess we have a slide of the separation wall. That's one other thing that is going on. They did not build it on that armistice line, and they kind of took to their side little valuable pieces of property like aquifers. Mm-hmm. So there's a piece of part of the wall. It's 8 meters tall. There are some places where it looks cleaner and neater, but I didn't really want a picture that looked that clean and neat, because it just seems like a horrible thing. And Jerusalem was a divided city. When we arrived there in 1969, we had friends who had been there before the Six-Day War. And, Jerusalem, like Berlin, was a, city that was separated by a wall. Mm-hmm. And it would just be a horrible idea to think of Jerusalem being separated by a wall. It's a historic and holy city for a lot of people around the world, not just the Jewish population. Mm-hmm.
It was in the UN declaration, right? It was intended to be a jointly managed, kind of like a District of Columbia situation for both people, because it was recognized as a holy city.
I think so, but it ended up with a wall.
Yeah.
Although when we were there, whenever we visited, we stayed in hotels that were in East Jerusalem. They were, the East Jerusalem was a Palestinian half, and the old city was also in the Palestinian half, most of it. And it was cheaper, the food was good, we were young, poor people, and you might get the Hilton hotels on the Israeli side, but the nice little homey ones on the other side. Mm-hmm. So anyway, that I just thought it would be a good idea to take a look at what was happening before October 7th. It didn't really happen in a vacuum, and although I tend to prefer nonviolence, even the UN says that people have a right to rise up against oppressors. Yeah,
I find violence, really horrific and distasteful, and and I don't really make an exception for October 7th myself.
Right.
I understand the right to self-defense. I understand we're talking about an oppressed people at an extreme disadvantage, under siege. Gaza was under siege since 2007.
Right, from air, land, and water.
On a starvation diet, and many thousands of prisoners taken, no justice, no kind of like rights. And so I understand like the source of the animosity. I have a personal like moral opposition to taking out to punishing any innocent people or killing any innocent people. I have a very strong anti-violence stance. My heroes in history are people like Gandhi, Martin Luther King, people who thought we can win this fight without violence. And I think and it feels maybe preachy for me to tell people how to defend themselves against the kind of oppression that they're undergoing. But in my ideal world, that nonviolence can win. I know that they tried to have nonviolent protests and were shot at by snipers over the wall in Gaza, and there's at some point we have to move forward past the violence, and the only route is through justice. And nonviolence can be very powerful. It's not. I'm not there, but I would think that if I were in Gaza, I would like to think that I would remain nonviolent, because I have a very strong feeling about it.
Well, and we might have time to talk about it later in the show, but there are things going on in this country too that I believe the people need to find where our power is. And just from a practical point of view, we can't outgun the federal government. I mean, they've got bombs, they've got tanks, so our strength has got to be somewhere else. Like, our labor could bring everything to a standstill if we were organized about it. So I do feel like sometimes it's challenging, but it's hard to top state violence with more personal level violence.
Yeah, I mean, there's the power of labor, which, as we've seen in Italy, with the strikes that they've been able to shut down the ports. They said, if you touch the Samud flotilla, the humanitarian flotilla bringing aid to Israel, if Israel attacks it, which they did, we're going to shut down the ports. We're going to shut down the country. And they had an extremely impressive strike. And these things are powerful. And sadly, I think that the solidarity is not there in this country. The solidarity, our labor unions are weaker than they were, but also just that feeling of solidarity with Palestine that is very strong in so many countries. I mean, if you look at the reports of demonstrations in other countries around the world, they're enormous. And we've had some enormous protests of our own that I've been to, a couple of them in D.C. that were maybe 300, 400,000 strong. But, to pull off a national strike in the United States,
it's still hard.
It's asking a lot.
So just to kind of show a picture of what's happened to Gaza City, and the people who live there. This is what downtown Gaza looked like 2007. This was right, just a couple weeks after the initial bombings of Gaza City. I have another picture, recent, more rubble. I know that it's been talked about, people want the seaside, Mediterranean seaside land for a resort, but it would take decades to clean it up. And then there's a tent city, which is in the safe zone where people have been evacuated to. So think that these people in these tents, they were living in the houses that we saw in the first picture.
Right. And still, even the tents get bombed. And I see you have safe zone in quotes because even the safe zone is not. That's why I was laughing.
Yeah, it isn't. No, it's where they're being told to go is safe. But one of the most appalling thing that's happening is just the level of cruelty targeting people who are doing things, what they're being told they need to do to stay safe. Food drops are being used by some people for target practice, and these tents, are supposed to be safe zones, and they're not.
Yeah, and it was the U.S. was one of the countries that voted to defund the United Nations Relief Works Agency, the UNRWA, which was providing humanitarian assistance, was the main source of humanitarian assistance. Even before October 7th, 80% of the country was living in poverty because of the siege of Gaza. There's a wall, right, and you can't trade.
And they can't use
sea.
access. Yeah, they have a blockade in the Mediterranean.
Yep.
Gaza could have resources. There are natural gas fields, off the coast, but that natural gas, I think, is mostly getting exported to Europe.
Yeah.
And the Palestinians do not have access to it. So having painted a pretty bleak picture, I wanted to talk a little bit about the people in the world who are advocating for human rights, although you look like you wanted to say something more on that.
Well, yeah, I think, when I think about all this, you have to ask what is the end goal? Where is all of this going? And one theory I've heard is that the plan is to make the area so completely uninhabitable and so completely miserable that everyone is desperate to leave. And then you open a gate in the fence to Egypt, and people will leave. And I think this was Norman Finkelstein who was saying, they asked Egypt, like, would you shoot at people if they came through the fence? And they said no. So maybe this is the plan.
Maybe.
To completely have the Palestinian version of the Trail of Tears, where everyone has to pack up whatever they can on their backs, and if they're not too sick, if they're capable of travel, and leave. Where else is this leading? I mean, there's no. I don't know. They've destroyed the infrastructure that you need to have a society to live. The hospitals. They go after the schools, the housing, 80% damaged or destroyed. Where is all this going? What is the end game plan? It's really and the cost is that to try and reform this into a habitable place again. And who spends that money? Are they going to spend that money? Palestinians don't have any money. are they going to spend all that money so that Palestinians can rebuild their lives? Who's going to help them financially to accomplish that? It seems more likely that the plan is we're going to make this the Palestinian Riviera, and we're going to make this part of Israel. We're going to annex this.
Yeah, they're pretty far away from being the Riviera. I mean, 30 years ago, Gaza could have been, but it's such a. I'm sure there are buried bodies, buried people. Disease could run rampant. I think it is off and on anyway. So I don't know. The other thing I had heard is that Netanyahu really feels a need to keep control of that area because if outsiders come in and see what's happened, he will end up in international court.
Well, I hope so.
I do too. Israel, Palestine need a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the way South Africa did, if they ever want to build a democratic country there. But we also, I think, need some accountability in the World Court, because this has not been kosher, so to speak. I wanted to mention a little bit about advocates for Palestinian rights and how many are Jewish. Now, admittedly, the Jewish community is very divided. I have relatives I will not touch the subject with. And friends, people, it's very divided, but it seems as though some of the strongest voices have been Jewish people. And I was in a conversation with someone recently, and I said, to me, it just seems like the most obvious thing in the world for an Ashkenazic Jew to be against genocide. Mm-hmm. It's like, what makes more sense than that? Mm-hmm. And people who, I probably lost second cousins in the Holocaust. My grandparents all came from Eastern Europe. Mm-hmm. But I think about like the Mexican president, Claudia Sheinbaum, who has been very strong, both dealing with the U.S. and being vocal about Israel. There was a synagogue bombing in Manchester, England, fairly recently, and the Green Party leader in the UK is from Manchester and Jewish and pro-Palestinian, and the BBC wasn't interested in interviewing him, which I thought was quite interesting. The Green Party in general has had Jewish leadership, Jill Stein. I think of people like Medea Benjamin in a similar way. Mm-hmm. And of course, you mentioned Norman Finkelstein. Mm-hmm. Miko Peled spoke at the National Green Party annual meeting. Mm-hmm. Was really good. Mm-hmm. Mentioned that for all of these bombing raids, the people in the Palestinian villages that are up against the Israeli ones, the Israeli villages and kibbutzim and moshavim all have bomb shelters on their premises, and the Palestinian villages don't. So even an attack from outside to the area threatens the Palestinians more than the Jewish Israelis, which I never thought of when I lived there, but where we lived did have bomb shelters, mm-hmm. and I do not recall them in the mm-hmm. Bedouin villages nearby. And of course, there are refuseniks, people in Israel who refuse to serve in the military. Mm-hmm.
Well, it's interesting, Jill Stein is a very prominent Jewish woman who was our presidential candidate for the Green Party. Mm. And we focused, I worked on that campaign as field director, and that campaign ended up, we started, basically October 2024, And this was after Cornel West dropped out. We needed a strong candidate, and Jill Stein stepped up. And I think she turned out to be the perfect candidate for us because she was so eloquent, and it didn't hurt that she could defend against claims of being anti-Semitic based on being Jewish herself, and hers was a principled stance, Jewish voice for peace. I saw Shelley Altman at the vigil today at Yale New Haven of Jewish Voice for Peace, New Haven, Jewish Voice for Peace, and was also prominent in the student encampments that were crushed as a blow to free speech, that were speaking out against the genocide, and sadly have not returned due to enormous pressure. But Jill Stein, we poured our heart and soul into trying to raise awareness and to convince people that if you vote for Kamala Harris, or whether you vote for Donald Trump or Kamala Harris, either way you're voting for more genocide.
And I felt the one very interesting and positive aspect to the campaign, though there were a lot of frustrations, is that the Muslim community in Connecticut really embraced our party and us, that I never would have imagined.
Yeah, I got to really interface and meet a lot of people in the Muslim American community here in Connecticut. I got to go to mosques, which is something I hadn't done before. I had a Muslim friend in high school whose parents were from Egypt, but I never went to a mosque with him. But I got to go and see prayers, and I got to, and some of our signature gatherers. A lot of our signature gatherers came from the Muslim American community here in Connecticut, because they wanted to vote for a non-genocidal candidate, and to do that we needed to get her on the ballot in Connecticut, which was a tremendous amount of work. And thanks to their help and a lot of people's help, we were able to do it. And it was very disheartening to me that the vote totals were not what I had hoped for. I understand people worry about Trump, but to me, casting a vote for Kamala Harris, after everything we've been talking about tonight, and to say, I'm going to vote for someone who has said, I'm going to keep on with the same policies of Biden, keep on giving them money, keep on basically writing a blank check for what is a humanitarian atrocity. I couldn't even contemplate morally voting for Kamala Harris. I don't care how bad Trump is. I knew some Greens who didn't feel that way. There's diversity of opinion. And some Muslims who didn't feel that way. And, I understand and respect that. But I was not, I could never check a box next to a name Harris when I felt that would be the same as checking off a box on genocide.
Right. For me too, I feel as though, okay, so my life would be better probably under Harris, but we have to look beyond ourselves. So we have a couple more slides and barely 5 minutes. So the one slide was just a little quote from the Yitzhak Herzog, suggesting that civilians in Gaza are legitimate targets. And we mentioned this before, that this clearly contradicts the Geneva Conventions, and is part of the evidence that this is not rules of engagement in war do not apply. In the last couple minutes, I also wanted to show the last slide, just to show a couple of things that are going on that I think, in addition to a couple of the other things we can do to help in our last few minutes. In Bethlehem, there's an Institute for Biodiversity and Sustainability. The volunteer director is Dr. Mazen Kumsia, who was a professor at Yale, Palestinian from Bethlehem, who returned to Bethlehem probably around 2010 and started this institute. And they do a tremendous amount of research on the ecology of the area, and he often speaks of the ecocide. I mean, we've been talking mostly about cruelty and the suffering of the people, but if you can look at the whole landscape, you know, it's an environmental disaster as well. Mm-hmm. And
he was my cytogenetics professor when I was in medical resident. Yeah.
And he was, I think, the first or second guest we had on this show in 2004 when we started it. And then on the right, there was a picture of the Palestine Museum in Woodbridge, Connecticut, which I believe is the only one in this country. There is a Palestine Museum here. It coordinates some online programming with another Palestine Museum in Scotland. And it's worth going to, because I think part of the problem is that people have a very narrow view of Palestinians, and these endeavors may help expand.
Yeah. I was at a gathering of activists to talk about the issue of Palestine, and that was hosted by a couple in Orange, and Faisal, of the Palestinian Museum. I forget his last name.
Oh, I forget. I remember Faisal, but not his last name.
I'm forgetting his last name at the moment. But of the Palestinian Museum, which I do recommend people were going around talking about how can we change, what can we do to bring about change? What power do we have? Calling people, voting differently. How can calling our senators and representatives, and when it came to Faisal, he talked about the power of art. And I thought, yeah, that's really interesting. The power of art to kind of connect us as humans with people. When you go to the Palestinian Museum, you see the art there, you can relate to it. It's speaking a common language of expression and of the human experience, and that Palestinians are people just like us. We're all people, the world over, and my hope is for people to be able to learn to live in peace with each other, and it's a dream, I mean, I believe it is possible, but we have to learn to share, and we have to learn to share resources and not fight over them, and that includes land. We have to learn to live with diversity, and not demand that we're going to create a specific nation for a specific religion or a specific race or a specific this or specific that. We have to broaden our views of humanity and treat everyone with equal amounts of dignity and respect. And art is something that helps reveal, kind of the shared humanity among us.
Well, thank you, Justin. I think we're out of time. We didn't get a chance to really talk about the various actions, activities that are going on around the state. If anyone is interested in a list, I can forward it. You can can email us at info@nlgreens.org. There are some towns that are, and individuals that are talking about divesting, taking retirement money, savings, accounts out of the war machine.
Yes.
There are really a lot of things that we can do, even while we can't do everything.
Yes, the state of Connecticut, I think, has some $80 million or something to that effect invested. And even loans, direct loans to Israel, or investments in Israeli companies. So the campus protesters were focusing in the right area. The pressure point is financial. Boycott, divest, sanction kind of says it all.
Yes, and Jeff Halper adds for a binational democratic state, which is also BDS. So thank you, Justin, for driving to Groton. And next week, we're going back to local politics. Candidates Jeff Hart and Lucian Varela, who are running for city council, will be my guests. So we'll be talking New London again. But for October 7th, thanks for, commemorating, I guess, this date.
Thank you, Ronna.
When the rain don't